Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video we're going to be talking about Heliotrope by Pickering. And this one is about the main character Telio, who is a retired soldier who just now wants to live the quiet life on his farm and working as a stonemason. But when a coup occurs in the castle where he is working, he's kind of forced into one more adventure. Is kind of how I will phrase that. Now this is one that I really enjoyed parts of, and I had some things I didn't like about it either. So we're going to kind of split this up and talk about the good things, and then talk about the things I didn't like as well. There's a lot to talk about though, because there are definitely a lot of things that I did really like about this one. And this is, as you can see, this is a pretty long book, and it's kind of like a little. It has a bit of a sword and sorcery feel, although it also just has some like general epic fantasy. The use of magic here is interesting because we have mages and then we have stone guardians, and apparently they kind of got into a war between each other, and now they're not really around much anymore. But Telio is descended from mages, which is something that definitely becomes relevant, and kind of finding out bits and pieces about these something that's interesting as well. Now it's called Heliotrope, of course, because we have heliotropes, which are pretty important, which are these stone circles in these complex mosaic patterns that are somehow, I'm not going to say how, somehow involved in the power of mages, basically. And so that's something that's looked at quite a bit as well, and that Telly has a big interest in because of the fact that he works as a stonemason. So let's start with the positives about this, because there are, like I said, a lot of things that I did like here. And in general, and this is split into three parts, I'll say. And the first part I really, really enjoyed. It starts off a little bit slow, and so I know not everyone's going to be a huge fan of that, but it's really, we're getting to know the character of Telio, getting to see him, and he's working with the with stones and getting things set up. We learn a lot about his character and a little bit about the area around. And there's something that just I really enjoyed about reading about him doing his masonry, how much care he puts into it, the skill as well, and it does a lot of good developing. And so it moves pretty quick for me. Overall, with just getting through, and then before you know it, the inciting incidents are off, but we get to kind of spend some time with Telio, and I quite really enjoyed that. And the Telio as a character is also, I think, a really interesting character to have the focus here, because he is a retired soldier, trying to live the quiet life, which, that is, especially in heroic fantasy, that's a fairly common type of trope that you see. But it's a little different here because of the fact that Telio is a flawed character, and we're not necessarily like exploring his flaws or exploring him. This isn't even necessarily about him like overcoming it. It's just that Telio is Telio, and he is a flawed human being. He has issues, and they're not the end of the world. But kind of the way that we get to know him and see him as a character, and it's not like, oh, he's the rogue and just does things, or oh, he's just the hero, and so he's going to do all the good things. He's just a person. And so he, often is trying to do the right thing, and he has a lot of fantastic qualities, and he cares about people, and wants to protect people, but he also, he has some flaws. Like, he tends to drink a little bit too much sometimes, and there's some other things there as well. And so I think the way that Telio was written, it just made him feel like a very real character, and kind of focusing on him while also having other characters around as well, because we have some younger characters in this story as well, and we have kind of a non-traditional group that ends up being a little bit of a found family as well. And so the characters, including the other important characters that I won't specifically mention because the blurb doesn't, so I try not to reveal anything if the blurb doesn't specifically mention it. But some of the other characters, I feel like in a lot of books, they would have been the main characters. A lot of times in a story like this, it'd be the young character, and it's the coming of age, and you have that type of thing where it's really the stories about them. And our younger characters and our other characters, they're still important, but ultimately this is Telio's story. And so it's taking some bits of somewhat familiar story, but telling it in a different way around Telio, which I really quite enjoyed. And the getting toward like further into the end as well, getting to explore the different kinds of magic and some of the way that the world is built as well. Was also some things that I really enjoyed about this and I had a really great time with. Just kind of finding more about the magic in the world and seeing how all of these things work and seeing where all of our characters end up fitting into some things and everything that was set up as well. Now, talking about some negatives, and I will say that first off, this book is definitely too long. I mentioned and showed you this is a very large book. This is, I mean, it's nearing 800 pages, and it does not feel to me like it needed to be 800 pages. I talked about how I really, really liked the first part, and I liked the third part a lot too, but the second part for me really kind of drug in a lot of places. It felt like it was a lot longer than it needed to be, and so while I liked parts of it and some of the things that were happening, that just kind of brought me down there in the middle where I just felt like it was taking a while, and so that was definitely something I kind of had an issue with. And so I know I read a lot of longer and slower books, and so it's not normally really an issue for me, but here I was definitely feeling it. One thing I will say though is that this is written. This is very readable. So it has fairly simple prose. So it's not like a lot of long books where it like is drawn out or like heavily descriptive or using different kinds of like more like elevated words or anything like that. It is very, very readable, so it doesn't necessarily feel like it's 800 pages. At the same time, I feel like that's slightly contradictory. It does read quickly, but it's still the middle section just kind of went on for me. And I do wonder, I was thinking about it, if it's like, if my brain is okay with the longer, slower books based on the prose or not, I don't know. But so that's kind of the thing that just felt like that was, some things took a little bit long. There were a few other things with the general language, which, like I said, it was pretty simple, very easy to read with it. And there were a couple of random quirks with word choices that annoy me because I'm weird. One of them is the use of okay, which I have complained about before in fantasy, and that's more of a me thing than an anybody else thing. But I'll say, for example, another book that I liked this considerably more than, like, people who liked Illborn. That, for me, I also felt it was too long, and it did have very simple prose, so read quickly. So, like, with moving fast, despite its length, I would compare there, although I did not care for that book, and I still enjoyed this one quite a bit, so I would compare that as well. But kind of a similar feel. So if you are kind of not sure on a longer book, but you like it simpler, easier to read prose versus the kind of heavier prose type of stories, this is still one that you would probably work out well for you because of that. And like I said, the characters and the way that the story is structured around them is really interesting as well. And you got your found family, you have your interesting kind of magic and world building with that kind of simpler sword and sorcery feel where we're not running around doing all kinds of magic and that sort of thing. It's more basic. And it's the kind of the premise where they don't really know a whole lot about the magic anymore because of the fact that it's not really prevalent anymore because it's been outlawed most places, and so for an interesting time there. Now the other thing I would say that was a bit of a negative for me was I did feel at times that the story or the characters were just kind of wandering because there were some things where it didn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense of why they were doing what they were doing or where they were going. It was just kind of like, oh, I guess we'll do this, and then that's kind of what happened. And so there were a few times with that where I felt like, why did we really make this decision? Or like, wouldn't have this been something that was a little bit more of a discussion with it? And there were some reasons for why some things were done, but sometimes it felt a little arbitrary as well. And I think part of that was just that is kind of what they were doing. It's we're going and we're seeing the world, and they just kind of, it wasn't necessarily something that was thought about a whole lot, and part of it might be because the character isn't one to just sit down and plan necessarily. The character is one to just kind of do and decide what they're going to do. So I think that plays into it somewhat. But there were a couple times it just felt like, I'm like, why did we do this? I don't know. And so that was one of the other things that I wasn't a huge fan of. So like I said, there were definitely a lot of things I liked and some things that I wasn't a fan of here. But overall, this was an enjoyable story. Like I said, a bit long at parts. In the middle, it did drag a little bit for me, but the beginning and the ending I quite enjoyed. I don't know what it was about the beginning, but I was just pulled into this like immediately. I really, really loved the beginning. And then, and like I said, I had some issues midway, but then the end I thought really ended up pulling it together. Although I will say the epilogue, while awesome, was also really long. It was like a full another chapter of the epilogue to kind of tell you what was going to be coming after. Although, to be fair, I expected some of that to be in the story itself. So it did feel like it was kind of necessary to just show you what was going to be going on next. But it takes the story in some different directions than what you would expect. Like I said, some of it's a somewhat familiar premise, but done in a different way. And it's different characters are doing different things. All of the characters are relevant one way or another, but in different ways, and sometimes it's them figuring out how they're going to interact. And so it manages to still feel very unique and compelling with the characters and their kind of stories. Telio is a character, like I said, in general, too. It's part of what he's dealing with, which is in the blurb, so not a spoiler, is he lost his family during the war. His wife and daughter were murdered, and his son was taken prisoner. And he is still like wants to hold out hope that his son is alive out there somewhere, but kind of dealing with that as well. So between that and then the found family elements as well, I think there's definitely some heartwarming moments in seeing how things turn out. But like I said, it's not just a black and white kind of thing. Really as well with that character and just with the story as general, because things do go into some different directions, and Telio as a character is flawed, and I think that makes him a lot more realistic and interesting as a main character as well. So overall, though, like I said, I did really enjoy this one. It had its issues as well as things that I liked, but I had a good time reading Heliotrope. So that is it for this one. Make sure to get the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description as always for the Wizardly Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, any books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun and we'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.